All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is episode 6 of the Star Forum webinar series. We are very privileged to have one of our top MISA partners joining us, folks from Ontinue, and we are going to be diving into supply chain attacks, most specifically Shai Hulud 2.0. If you haven't joined an event previously, this is your first time, I want to give you some background in terms of what to expect. We have, by design, deactivated the video stream as well as audio and the chat. So in order to engage with us, because we love all of your feedback and all of the interactions, please leverage the Q&A module. Yes, this is being recorded. Yes, the slide deck with the advanced hunting queries and all of the goodies and insights included in today's chats will be available after the session. We have a post-event survey, so if you go ahead and submit that, you'll be able to access those assets that much quicker. My name is Ray Wolfram, and I am joined here by my co-host, Sam Gardner. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Well, Ray did the formal introduction. I'm Sam Gardner. I run Defender Experts US operations, and I'm so excited to be a part of this endeavor.
Excellent. Okay. So as we shared earlier, go ahead and let us know if you're interested in the recording and the slide deck, but rest assured it will be made available to you, especially upon submission of that post-event survey. So I want to dive right into introducing our panelists, and then we can get into the heart of our conversation. So Dom and Balaj, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Dom DeVito. I work as a principal threat hunter at Ontinue. Got a lot of years in the industry and specialize in this kind of hunting for our customer base.
Hello everyone, my name is Balázs Grexa. I lead the advanced threat operations team in Ontinue, also doing threat hunting, TI, and research.
Excellent. And Kayjan?
Hello, everyone. Kayjan Sweeney. I'm a senior security researcher with the Defender Experts team on the US side.
Excellent. And you're representing Microsoft, right? And so
Yes.
if we take a step back here, Shai Hulud 2.0 didn't happen overnight. Supply chain attacks aren't new. Can you share a little bit about the background?
Yeah, absolutely. So this slide that you guys see here, this is basically a highlight, if you will, of a brief history of supply chain attacks. As you can see, one of the very first things I have up there is 2017 NotPetya. Some of you guys might remember that. But even though supply chain attacks go further back than that, I mean, we can go back to 2013 with the Target compromise, and that had to do with a third-party vendor, a HVAC vendor, that led to the compromise of millions of customers' credit card information, right, via the point-of-sale purchase systems. But basically, one thing about this, right, whether it's NotPetya, whether it's CCleaner, whether it's ShadowHammer, even SolarWinds, right, what they demonstrate is they demonstrate a pattern, right? Attackers, they like to exploit trusted software, right? And they like to exploit the channels that the software travels through in order to deliver malicious code at scale, right? It shows how deeply trusted and embedded the modern ecosystem is, and how once compromised, that enables attackers to pivot broadly and silently. And this kind of sets the stage for Shai Hulud, because Shai Hulud is a modern supply chain attack, right? And one thing that you will see is the evolution of this type of model of compromising the infrastructure in which we rely on every day, right? As users, right? And so that's basically what I wanted to present here. And you can see, at various different stages, the industry at large responded to supply chain attacks, especially with SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds is kind of like a big wake-up call. I was around during that time working for the federal government, so I definitely understood the incentive and the urgency to ensure something like that didn't happen again. But yeah, again, this is that overview of a supply chain timeline and why we have to set this stage in order to understand the totality and impact of something like a Shai Hulud.
That's super helpful. And so, I mean, what makes it more attractive for attackers to pursue like the ecosystem at large versus an individual single target?
Yeah, so I would say the attractiveness really comes from why would I target one individual node, right? One endpoint, one user, when I can potentially compromise thousands, maybe millions, right? And this is what something like the node package manager kind of provides, right? It provides an attack surface unintentionally, right? But we're dealing with things, in that nature where, you know, you have a registry with billions of packages used every day by developers, embedded uh, pre-installation packets, post-installation builds, all these different things, and it's a critical trust layer, right? And that's what the adversary looks at. Hey, this is a trust layer that I can exploit, and the downstream impact is, hey, billions of devices at one time. In Shai Hulud's case, credentials at one time, by focusing on the upstream. Dom?
I was going to say, I think also there's an element of not quite knowing how lucky they're going to be. They know what the initial compromise point is, and they know how that's going to then cascade. Or they've got some ideas as to how that's going to cascade because they know who's downstream of that particular developer. But I think ultimately the goal is to get into places where they might have access to banking infrastructure or whatever is eventually using that malicious software and can be compromised. What those creds will be. So I think there's an element of it's a bit of a lucky draw. You might win the lottery on this and get compromised to something really big and really effective. If going back to the SolarWinds, it was really they were clearly after, in that case, they were clearly after a particular set of infrastructure. There were some filters in there to constrain it in certain places and the like, and they really were after a particular set of targets. But in this case here with Shai Hulud, I think they've been more open door about it and said, well, we'll just collect everything and then we'll figure out whether that stuff, the value of it, and hope that what we steal, those credentials, will be able to be leveraged, and they won't know, the end user won't know that those credentials have been stolen. They won't know about it until it's too late. So
I just want to add one last thing. When you think of the security in-depth model, right, and from a developer standpoint, you want to, embed those security controls ground zero as we're developing our software. And what we're talking about fundamentally is the breaking of that foundation, right? And that makes it so elusive as a security defender, right? Because we're talking that ground zero, they are walking hand in hand or in tandem with the developer themselves, right? And how
yeah.
do you break that chain, right? And in this case right here with NPM, we're going to discuss this a little more.
Well, yeah, so in terms of the scale that we're dealing with here, how does that inform how defenders prioritize?
I would say they have to prioritize based on the impact radius, right? What is the potential impact of us being compromised by something like this, right? As opposed to one individual package, right? We have seen in the past individual packages get compromised, and that leads to a much smaller scale of exploitation across an enterprise or consumer base. But when you have to think about something, especially leveraging something like NPM, and I don't want to limit to just NPM and just act like we're picking on them. But again, same thing with Python's pip ecosystem. These have been compromised at large, right? So NPM is not the only one, just one of the most prevalent. But defenders and security teams, enterprises, all the way, from the SOC analyst all the way up to the CISO level, they have to think about what's the potential impact to our enterprise, right? What is the risk, right? And what is the potential attack surface? And I think when we're examining, going back to Sam's points, the developer lifecycle, we have frameworks and we have policies and recommendations that have been pushed out since something like a SolarWinds Orion compromise, right? Targeting secure code development, targeting ensuring that certain users within the enterprise are when it comes to examining what is the risk level for a potential software engineer interacting with a registry such as this. So defenders have to think about the entire ecosystem at large, and as opposed to just one or two packages being compromised here and there. And I think these numbers kind of speak to that when you think about the numbers that are being presented and reported out from the industry at large. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you also, if you think about the number of packages and the like, I think the fundamental break in the trust train, and going back to your point about defenders, that they're also people that aren't involved in this stuff. They're not the people who really understand what's going on inside a business in terms of developer operations and how their workflows look like. So they're kind of playing catch up to figure out what normal looks like with these developers. Is what they're doing, and whether they're running setup bun and things like that. And is that normal? Is it not normal? Actually, it is normal. It's happened 400 times in the last month. But this time it's different. This time it's slightly different, and therefore that's why it's bad. So there's that kind of problem with the defenders where they simply don't have the insight, or they need to figure out what the history is. Telemetry and Sentinel and Defender give you that kind of great ability to kind of look back through logs, go through the threat handling logs or the Sentinel logs and log analytics, telemetry, and give you some insight. But you don't really want to be learning about a problem or learning how to find a problem or whether something is a problem retrospectively. That's an unpleasant place to be. And like I say, we will have a clock and with a potential timeline between compromise and exploitation and reuse of those credentials that might be stolen. So having defenders understand how your environment is and how your business works is painful. So I think there's really a break in the kind of confidence chain as to how things are. And often there's this kind of explosion that we have with Shai Hulud, where so many things were compromised quite quickly, and there was an expanding bubble of things that were compromised. You literally, literally hitting refresh on the page, which showed packages that were compromised. And that's not a great place to be with a defender, where you're trying to figure out what the actual indicators are, what the behaviors are, but at the same time, you've got hard evidence of this package is compromised, this package is compromised, if it's this particular version, but if it's not, if it's this particular version. So, or conversely, if it's this version, their machine's compromised, even though they've now upgraded and gone beyond that version. So it's difficult.
So is it really that nuance? So if we're talking about addressing the dwell time, the place in which the malicious behavior lives, is that generic and blanket, or does it really depend on the particular scenario?
I would like to say one thing. I would say this is where anomaly-driven hunts really shine, right? And I think you touched on it a little bit, Don, when you talked about baselining, knowing the network. No one knows the network better than the SOC team, right? They should know it. They should be having constant conversations with the pen testers, the vulnerability assessment team, to close that loop and to shorten that dwell time. But I want to sit here and say this: we have to get out of that mindset where, trusting the vendor, because everyone is up for targeting right at this point. And most of the time, if you look at it from a standpoint of how we protect, this is where EDR shines, right? Because they're looking at anomalies. It's yes, you got to tune it. It can be quite noisy, but it also can shine a light on things that are not happening as it should, right?
Yeah. I think it's also really cute that what happened. So Shai Hulud's very novel in a lot of different ways. I think I'd like to have a conversation with the person who authored it or the group that authored it, because they really took things in a different angle and did well. I think they weren't as successful as possibly their efforts would entitle them to be, because some of the cute things, even things that where EDR might go and you go and say, actually, EDR can solve some many problems by using tools like TruffleHog to access credential files. Even if you had rules that said, you know what, if credential files are being accessed, then that's a bad thing. But you're probably going to have an exception in there for tools that are designed to, find and monitor the kind of credentials, and TruffleHog might well be in that list. So they've done some good work to kind of figure out what EDR would be possibly blindsided from or deliberately tuned down from.
I would say, Ray, would you mind dropping to slide 10 where we do the comparison, the side-by-side comparison? Because I feel like this is like I love like a video game. So I feel like this was like a level up. The next one, yep. This is where they're leveling up, right? You're seeing them grow, you're seeing the wheels turn, and they're like, okay, 1.0, that was just a starter pack. 2.0, we're going to take it up another level.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to speak to Sam's point about that, I believe what made 2.0 particularly so elusive is the moving the initial access, the execution phase to pre-install, right? The pre-installation in regards to lifecycle packaging, that definitely impacted far more machines than as opposed to what Shai Hulud 1.0 introduced, right? It was a situation where we were, essentially were able to identify, packages, in the post-installation phase as opposed to the pre-install phase. When you go back to looking at this from an EDR telemetry standpoint, what is setup Bun.js doing right now? What is this runner time environment being set up? From a defender perspective, if you haven't really, dealt with software lifecycle development or code in that manner, or dealt with the supply chain attack historically, you might not be aware, as a SOC analyst looking at this behavior. But then you see the truffle hog activity, and now you're saying, okay, something's actually going on here. So I think, it definitely speaks to the evolution, right, and the propagation. They certainly learned from the first Shai Hulud attack back in September. There are certain things we need to tweak in order to be successful.
I'd like to go on a limb. I think the original Shai Hulud was a test. It was an experiment that went a little bit wrong because it got caught before they'd kind of finished their development phase, because there were so many things in that they did so well and were so novel and really kind of as a cybersecurity engineer, expert, really quite cool stuff that they were doing there to get around stuff and look at things in a different way and attack, arguably attack a soft target in a way that was really subtle, and I thought that was really cool. But what they didn't do was some of the more mundane stuff, which other groups, Lockbit and the like would pick up on. Like not using any kind of randomization in where they were exfiltrating. They were, putting the word Shai Hulud in things. Makes it very easy then for you to go around and find on GitHub. You could do a search on GitHub for these kind of things. And so that's a novice behavior. That's not kind of doing the smarts and thinking, okay, I can just make a number generator, create some words, and just have random things. I'll know what the DNG, what the random number generator is going to be generating for the strings, where those credentials are going to be, but nobody else will. Or, the security analysts will have to catch up. So I think version 1 was a very much an experiment, a little bit of an experiment that got caught too early. Version 2 was them learning from that behavior, learning how they got caught, learning how to avoid the defenders, and moving on. I have heard of there being a version 3, but I think we'll still have to kind of wait to an appropriate Friday evening for that to drop.
So if organizations, let's say hypothetically, had a decent handle on Shai Hulud 1.0, what specifically about Shai Hulud 2.0 would have failed? So let's say they had their playbooks, they had their response flow. What would have fallen short if they were hit with 2.0, but was relatively effective for them in 1.0?
I mean, I think that the key thing that I think you pointed out, the key thing around 2 is it does exfil, and it operates much earlier in the chain, and as a result, you end up in a situation where you detect this when it's too late. To be frank, that's kind of how it works. 1.0, there was possibilities that you could get detect things, and even put rules in place that would block before your machine was compromised, credentials were exfiltrated and the like. With V2, you just don't have that. It's going to be, if yes, you can clearly have some rules that trigger, but the same ones wouldn't. So it's about getting in. They moved their exfil further up the train, and it became much more of a race, a defender race.
You know what, Dom? I would take it one step further, Dom, because I like this pin that you're pulling right now when it comes to exfil. I would say the exfil was strategically placed, right? It's embedded in the telemetry modules, right? So it's functioning as it should, right? It's hiding in the noise, which makes it even more convincing, right? And from a application whitelisting perspective, right? You're thinking business as usual, right? What triggers it? What's the tipping point? Because from an EDR standpoint, majority of the time, or an AV standpoint, it's already trusted, right? It's doing what it's supposed to. What are the things that we can underpin to say, you know what? Aha, something is happening.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. You have no idea how many logs I troll through, and it was just the volume of these things just looking exactly normal. And developers, I hate to say it, developers are really hardworking. So a lot of this was going on, just a trundle. There's masses of these of hits against this stuff. So we then have to kind of work about, okay, this is happening here. This is an unusual volume suddenly, or this is happening, unusual behavior, or there's a combination of behaviors, which is really what we were doing at Ontinue to try and kind of figure out, rather than saying, look, homing in on one thing or anding those behaviors together. We were kind of like saying, okay, if it's doing this or this or this or this, if it's got 90% of the behaviors or 75% of the behaviors, then we'll deep dive on that. But it's hard. There was a lot of noise and obviously with noise as a defender, you're always frightened that there's going to be just one win, and we have to win every time because that's what we do.
Okay, so tell me more about where the visibility ought to begin in like an ideal setting, and how we can rethink the approach.
I would say it needs to begin where the trust begins, right? So we just talked about that the whole trust, has been broken, and I saw some interesting parallels as well. Software distribution has been also targeted. If you just think about on-prem environments too, right? And then transitioning that to something that's so widely distributing packages like NPM, I think that's also very interesting. And so, as Kajan already said earlier, I think the pre-install, vector was very interesting at this time, where that's something that you would normally, allow to happen, because otherwise your software engineers will be very unhappy about your product. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to further add to that, I would say dependency behavior. I think one thing in terms of the CI/CD lifecycle or developer lifecycle can tighten up security around that is to also analyze dependencies being used, right? Because this is basically the Achilles heel, right? The dependency behavior during the pre-install phase, that is what looked normal in terms of telemetry. So when Dom talks about noise, when you're sifting through thousands of logs of telemetry, and you have a difficult time separating which of this pre-install execution phase is part of normal developer workflows and which is actually part of Shai Hulud. And oftentimes you don't actually realize that until you see something like the truffle hog introduced or exfiltration to GitHub and all those additional activity that you have to align with. So from the burden of proof shifted earlier to the pre-install phase, and I think when it comes to Shai Hulud 1.0, that's where they failed necessarily, because they waited for the runtime, the actual post-installation execution, and it was easier to be caught at that time.
Also, I think a key thing we're missing on, and Balázs touched on when talked about trust. I think we can't get away from the fact, and it's really the elephant in the room, that developer environments are typically much more fluid and don't want to say the word poorly managed, but they have a need to kind of try new things and pull things, and they will pull in new libraries to see things quicker, and they will do that dev, and it's always fast paced, and it potentially is going to be pulling in libraries from places that the security team haven't approved. That's not how that works. Or maybe it's not going to get reviewed. It's going to be tried. It's going to be tested to see if it's quicker, better, whatever, and adds more functionality. So they're pulling in things from who knows where, and that's then obviously landing on their machines. And that fluid lack of constraint or lack of review about what they're doing then results in potentially that going into the CI/CD chain and ultimately things being compromised. So as we've seen with Shai Hulud. But I think we got to get into a place where there is greater controls around what's happening on those development environments, because without protecting those development environments, that's really the ultimate upstream that they want to get into, and when we have to kind of protect to get the best downstream benefits.
So there seems to be an aspect of maybe change management initiative in terms of how the developers work within this security first zero trust construct as much as possible. In terms, to your point, of immediate technical controls that could be applied, and that defender security team mindset. Can you share a little bit from your perspective what you would recommend and how you would position your team to be as effective as possible, as timely as possible?
I think it's a bit, I say it's a bit difficult. I definitely think there's elements. So the better bang for buck on the whole thing is probably going for or looking for things that are rare and high value for an attacker, because attackers will still want to go for the goodies if they've got them. So credential files are a really good place to look. Anything accessing that kind of stuff, and even if it's using truffle hog or tools that should be going in there, you need to kind of look at where that came, that process chain was, and what was really initiating that. So I think that's the kind of the best place to get your most bang for buck, is any kind of attention around places where you'd have credentials and that sort of thing, or other things that are tradable, valuable, keys, creds, or even anything else, to be frank, that's good in there. But fundamentally, that's you're going to probably be lucky rather than thorough on that front, because it is about protecting that end point, that end development environment, so that you can be sure that what they're putting in isn't malicious, because that's effectively what they're going to do, is inject into the CI/CD flow something that's malicious. And if that malicious code at the time doesn't enact grabbing credentials, and it waits 24 hours rather than doing it straight away, then you're going to be in a place where you're playing catch up. So to your point about EDR and how that can help, that's probably the thing to do, is to look real carefully at anything that looks sensitive credentials wise, keys, credentials, that kind of stuff, and trigger highly on that with a high alert, and then figure it out, tune it away.
Yeah, I would certainly add to that, and just echo that if initial access and execution analysis or detection prove to be very cumbersome, giving the noise, right? As long as you are ensuring telemetry wise and from a detection standpoint, you have detections in place from a post-execution standpoint in regards to suspicious credential access and in regards to exfiltration to GitHub. This isn't the first campaign to exfiltrate data to GitHub, right? It has been, a trusted site that's been lived off of and continues to be lived off of for some time now. So to Dom's point, having those particular detections and or hunting queries in place, constantly assessing the environment for any activity that may be indicative of some type of post-exploit behavior. I think that can certainly assist, defenders from a hunting and detection standpoint.
And in terms of hunting and detection, I know that there is an example here. Can you walk us through what we're looking at?
Yeah, so basically, these queries here is what you would examine when the setup bun.js and then bun environment, leveraging Node, right? Because we're talking about the Node package manager, NPM. This is what will occur during that pre-installation phase, right? And the query below it, this is actually, suspicious processes that's launched by that JavaScript execution. So within that, and then there's a few things you can see, some PowerShell aliases, invoke REST method, invoke expression. You can see reaching out to bun sh install. This will identify activity during the pre-install phase prior to you even getting to the truffle haul credential scanning activity or the GitHub exfiltration. So this particular HQ, again, it's not necessarily sophisticated per se, but running this in a typical environment where you typically would not be aware of something like a Shai Hulud, you could necessarily be prone to traditional false positives, right? And it depends on what you're separating and what comes after the execution within a EDR standpoint, right? Because EDR will pick up on the noise, and it's also about correlating those signals together. And when you see something like an unauthorized script execution plus unexpected network or identity behavior, that is basically a pivot there, right? And this is the particular downstream impact of something like a Shai Hulud during the lifecycle process. So to just put it simply, these hunting queries will certainly, help identify in that aspect.
And thank you, Keijon. And Dom, I loved your line earlier. Figure it out and tune it away. That's going to become my life's motto henceforth. From your perspective, how can defender security teams leverage, to Keijon's point, it may not be the most sophisticated or elaborate, but this is going to be one tool in your arsenal to help get upstream or shift left of bang as effectively as possible.
So Keijon's point, he touched on timelining of this as well, and I think that's the thing that's when you're kind of filtering and looking at the stuff, you can kind of utilize, say that A happens before B, and then there's C, and then there's D. That understanding that ordering is really kind of can be very specific to the threat. As important as well, because people might well be running bun. They might even be installing bun, but they'll be doing it, with different. Maybe they're using Node to install it, but there'll be a timeline of events, and getting the bun installed followed by some NPM activity, some Node activity. That's going to be a benign positive. The other way around, not so much. So understanding the order of execution, understanding what's normal. I hate to say it because every SOC guy out there goes, I have to look at a lot of logs to figure out what normal looks like. And it's great to have the kind of length of telemetry we have on Defender and Sentinel, with 30 and 90 days being really typical. So to be able to go back in time and say, actually, this is what we see normally, and this is not, this is different, and if nothing else, that developer is doing something that they didn't do last week. That's kind of critical. I personally like to kind of break things down. I'm a bit more, what's the word here? I'm minded to always go broader and go more vague. So I'll take the kind of queries here and the kind of queries that other people put out at the time, break them into atomic parts, and look for any of those pieces. So, bun install might be one, some other commands, node running being other, and then kind of generate a point score based on that, and then use that point score to understand how often node is executed, how often, command exe or bun install is called in this way, and then say, well, okay, based on that, what machines, what entities, what users out there are actually doing, most of them or a number of them, and you can pretty much chart that and see where there's usually, there is in this case, a very quite sharp gradient where you go from what normal looks like with 1 or 2, 3 kind of the atomic behaviors being triggered as normal behavior, and then you get the malicious, Shai Hulud 1 and 2, and that's triggering out at the kind of like 90 100% of the behaviors. So that can help you look for not just versions 1 and 2, but other variants. And we have had malware in the past where it's forked really quickly, and people have taken that piece of code and thought, that's a really good idea. I'm gonna do that as well. They've got source, they've got the mechanisms, they can deliver it in the same way, and that's worrying, because then you get these, like, say, forked versions of same, which we still have to trigger on, and there all might even be, I mean, there's a presumption this is V1. For all we know, there was a V0 and a V-1 out there that just we haven't found. So again, it's only by being atomic about these kind of things, breaking them down, having a look, understanding what your users are doing, what normal looks like, and then filtering to find what looks a bit suspicious, that you're really going to get to a confident answer.
So I hear two major themes, right? So we hear anomaly hunting back again, right? But what pairs well with a good anomaly hunt, like a fine wine, baselining, right? That's something that we have to do in order to find what's in the noise, like that needle in the haystack, right? But the other portion that I wanted to mention that people sometimes back away from, say that it's reactive, it's the retro hunting aspect of it. Like, learn, right, and fight another day. Nothing is wrong with that, right? And I think that's the beauty of like having a managed SIEM, whether it's Sentinel or whatever, to do those retro hunts, those 30, 60, 90-day lookbacks is valued there. It's a breeding ground. You can learn from it, right? And and it's a little more forgiving, right? Because it's not under the gun. Have fun with it. And I want to take one last step back, because I mean, we're looking at it from a vantage point of, I'm a defender, I'm on the front lines, and I want to find the next Shai Hulud 3.0. But I want to take a look back at that foundation we talked about, the developer themselves, right? If I'm a developer, you're my SOC team, right? How can I, best posture myself so that I don't become the target, right? But also I don't become the propagation point, the pivot point, right, into other people's networks. What can I do?
Yeah, so I guess I would say DevOps, telemetry and security is just as important as what we might see on the endpoint. And also from an identity standpoint, right? I think if we're dealing with a developer department or component, in coordination with a SOC team in regards to, how can I participate to straighten an imposter based on my workflow, right? To not inadvertently introduce something malicious to the environment. I would definitely say, take heed of things like, code scanning, right? And these are things where now we're getting into a product discussion, right? Of ensuring that what what the developers are doing on a day-to-day basis, we are actually taking time to examine what packages are being pulled in, what dependencies are being referenced, right? That from a product standpoint can also be a huge benefit for a defender team, and then also surround the identity question, right? What privileges do exist with this particular user, with this particular team, right? Are there things from an identity standpoint that we should be aware of? Because one thing about developers is, we're also, oftentimes, which Shai Hulud attributed to, is the cloud credential access component as well. So now, we're targeting Azure, AWS, GCP, etc. Where do those identities lead to in return in terms of what permissions do I have outside of the endpoint, right? What other environments could this developer touch? So I think understanding one identity is very important when we're talking about correlating telemetry across signals, right? And then also from a product standpoint, what can the DevOps team leverage during their workflow, during their processes? Where can they actually look at, the dependencies or the packages they're actually bringing in? And, again, we have slides that talk about that from a defender standpoint, so I won't go into details now, but that's my perspective on it.
Yeah, I
So
really
I
like
have,
Kegon's.
wait,
Sorry,
I have one question because he said something I'm interested in. We initially start with the software itself, but what about the building of the environment, the dev environment to begin with, right? Start there. How do you guys feel? And this might be a little controversial right here, but air gap environments, right? What if we start there and also lengthening out the duration of a sprint, right? To ensure that we're actually really embedding security in the process itself. I'm gonna drop that grenade and I'm gonna see what you
Yeah,
guys want to do
that's
with
where
it.
the friction of cyber and
I would say that
development comes to
Go ahead, Dom.
that's an interesting. I'd say if you look at the XZ compromise, which was again another really beautiful. Love to meet the guy or lady who put that together. Because that was really cool because actually it was only discovered because it in a very specific instance was being monitored. The guy was timing how long his script was running, and actually this time it took a little bit, and it was a little bit. We're talking about a second rather than half a second to do the thing, but it added up, and he was curious, and he pulled that thread and said, "Oh, maybe I found a bug in SSH." And honestly, that's a corner case where you think of all the places. I mean, maximum ballsy to say, "Oh, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a backdoor into the most security reviewed, analyzed piece of software on the planet, SSH." Okay, and I'm gonna figure a way of doing that that leaves no artifacts behind. It was such a sweet compromise vector and attack vector, and super unlucky. And I but don't believe anyone ever found quite how it was used or actual live usage of it. But it was kind of glorious. And I think that's a point where even the air gapping is kind of difficult because you end up in a situation where, like in this case, it's all happened really quickly. There was an absolute speed of execution. It was a smash and grab. It was, hammer in the jewelers. You go in there, you grab the stuff, and you get out of there, and you hope that the EDR hasn't picked it up. But do you know what? Even if the EDR has picked it up, if it's been exfilled, I can't believe the people on the coded this stuff didn't have an automation in there to use those creds immediately and abuse them, potentially deploying who knows what, who knows where. So that's pretty bad. But yeah, so I think there's an interesting kind of dichotomy here. But development environments are hard. I would love to see a development environments locked down more, significantly more, so that it is this kind of difficult thing, and so we don't see the kind of put more guardrails around it all. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to do that anyway. If only because you don't necessarily want to run away versioning and that sort of thing, so that with bugs being introduced from libraries that you aren't particularly aware of. But more fundamentally, so you've got that kind of lockdown development environment that leads to a dependable CI/CD pipeline from the back of that. But it's hard. It's hard to take people, honestly, that are highly creative and want to do things fast and deliver quickly new and innovative things. And at the same time, you need to do that in a safe way. You want your baby to walk, and you want them to walk as fast as they possibly can. But however, there is a highway, so you gotta put some guardrails in there to make sure that they can still do what they got to do, just as safely as possible.
That was a crazy visual you just gave me. Baby highway cinema. That's what.
Yeah.
This is
you want
certainly
your child to walk. You just don't want them to walk in the road, right? So
certainly, the topic comes up, secure by design, right? And this is a prime example of why things like this, secure by design, zero trust, right, are touted in the industry, because every once in a while we do have something that awakens us to our limitations industry-wide, right? And incorporating that within the software development lifecycle is very, very important. And also talking about testing, right? Testing, deploying to a few assets, right? Containing that deployment, and until you actually get the green light and say, okay, this is good enough to go to production, to go live. But yeah, certainly.
I've actually worked.
You can also think about just different environments entirely, which of course some organizations can be bothered with that, but it's definitely long-term good practice. So having different credentials for production, your development and staging and whichever environments. Securing those credentials, separating that access even potentially between the developers, or having dedicated accounts. Then also thinking about like just the package management itself, right? I mean, you can hard code what you would like to use, so you don't always have to use the latest. That's also good for your stability purposes of your software. So obviously, you really want whatever you are running to be reliable, and you might want to test any changes. So if you are bumping up the versions, then you might suddenly run into some issues. So I think that's where like these good old SDLC practices can still help a lot organizations to try to avoid some of the pitfalls that comes with some automatic updates. Even though we know that the industry, from another angle, from a compliance and governance side, I think they really like to push us to also be up to date to the latest, which is also another interesting angle, I think, to consider, that you are pushed to update as soon as possible, not necessarily just the security updates, but like up to date software. And then this is getting hard to manage. Obviously, you can have package managers that can ease that, and then yeah, that's always a good practice. So I would say those are definitely good points to start. And then even in your environment, using something like Defender for Cloud, monitor what you're deploying to where, and doing hunting, like we talked about already. I think those are all great places to be. And as wider, like if you're a SOC analyst or threat hunter, if you're thinking about, okay, how can I really defend my environment against all of these seemingly random places which can introduce code. Well, some of these hunting queries really can help, but you can map out all the other ones. So you can look at your environment and look at, okay, what are we really using? Which software installers, package managers, etc., and then monitor for let's say find evil there. So monitor for abnormalities and baseline it, not just NPM. So I think that's a great place to be.
And Ray, don't kill me. Could you drop to slide 8? I always say there's a lot of power in a name. And so I'm curious, and I'm gonna pose it to the defenders here, was the name righteous, right? Did it really capture the genesis or the threat itself? Because I've seen some crazy names right now. Do you think this was actual spot on?
Yeah, I thought
Go on, K. John.
Yeah, I thought it certainly was spot on. I mean, when you examine Shai Hulud, for those who may not be aware, the name originates from these sandworms within this very popular book called Doom by Frank Herbert. And one thing about the sandworms is that you don't really notice in the movie or in the book, right, whatever you are aware of, you don't really notice the presence until the environment begins to shake and the sand is moving around and you hear the rumbles beneath the ground. I thought this was very, very appropriate for Shai Hulud. The attack was because it was technically beneath the surface, right? One of the things from a defender standpoint that we didn't really begin to notice was until the truffle hawk deployment, the runner environment being set up, and initiating the exfiltration to GitHub, etc. All these various different components, right? But on top of the surface, everything looks normal, right? You're thinking, oh, this is normal development workflows, right? And I thought that was very a good parallel, and very analogous to the Shai Hulud sandworm. So yeah.
With difficult naming, not to be confused with the sandworm. You could have read about Andy Greenberg's great book. So not by confusing with the APT, of course, but I think naming is really hard, especially now, attribution and threat actor naming. So I think for the malware, it really fits though, and it captures what we are looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a good choice of name. My own personal criticism about the whole thing is that like the kind of egotism around putting words in your malware in the first place. And unless it's some person out there has got their LinkedIn profile saying I created this malware with this name, I'm not quite sure how that tallies, but I do always find it quite amusing when you have really obvious indicators that the defenders can use in there in the code that then obviously becomes what is known as, and that's just really traditional. I think it says more about the authors of the code than it does about necessarily what's going on and like. But it's a very cool choice of name, like Keijon's point, and it does make a lot of sense in terms of the bigger picture. I think that if it was names, if that was buried somewhere less obvious, like the name of the GitHub repos, then that would have been a smarter move. But that played into our hands, and we could use that to hunt. So that was cool to have.
So we just reached the 10-minute marker, and I want us to have a quick hot take, of course, because I know this is we have a great quorum here, and we're all about hot takes. But I want to see if there's two things that we can agree on when it comes to supply chain compromise, right? One, vendor reputation is not equal security. Can we agree on this?
Yep.
Cybersecurity is a team sport, and I think it's a shared responsibility model, right? And so to have, if we're going to do zero trust, then you're going to do zero trust throughout, right? And you're not going to blindly assume, yes, we don't need to focus effort or energy in this area because this entity, this organization has got it covered. Everyone must remain vigilant, and then it's just about being as effective as possible within the constraints of the landscape you're operating in. But that is my very humble perspective here.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll be short on this one. One thing we often get, especially within the industry, is the need to be first and the need to be right, right? I think one thing that we can learn that can certainly help the industry at large is certainly the need to collaborate more often, right? And to ensure that we're only right against the adversary, right? I think betting against each other if, from we have a reputation of doing this, so because of that, you should inherently trust that effort. But we've seen things, even going back to SolarWinds, the aftermath and the impact it had on Mandiant, right? These are various different things and components where you can trust even the cybersecurity company themselves, right? And because of that implicit trust, you would also have a downstream effect, based on impact. So I think to answer your question, it's certainly necessary that reputation does not always equals trust, and we had to analyze all layers, right, within that defense in depth architecture, right?
You know what? I want to say this. Ray said something that was amazing, which was, cybersecurity is a team sport. And I want to just stop right here, look no further than this panel. Like, this is not just Microsoft voice. This is Microsoft and ecosystem, right? Our partners, which is super important for us. And this is why we lean in towards. My last and second hot take before I give it back over to my humble colleague. Code signing does not equal safety, right? And we've heard this many times before. People say, hey, it's signed, it's done, right? Microsoft signed it, Mandiant signed it, someone else signed it, right? Not to pick on people, right? And I picked on us, right? It doesn't equal trust. It doesn't equal safety. Can we agree on this?
100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
Vigilance is important, right?
Vigilance. That's a Harry Potter thing. Constant vigilance.
If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, right? And then it's understanding what readiness looks like. And I think that those were the points that we were hitting on. Obviously, leveraging some of the custom queries we included here in the deck today, operationalizing the guidance from Balazs and Dom and Keijon and Sam. It is not just a single point of failure that needs to be addressed, right? It's a cohesive, holistic approach here. And even if we're operating in an ecosystem, we are approaching this from that defender lens, right? And so that's what we have the most control over, or the ability to make the most direct impact. So that's probably where we should prioritize our efforts. Am I ending? There are no more closing perspectives here? Dom, I'm looking for you. I know you always have a hot take.
I'm still a bit mesmerized by the if you're always ready, if you stay ready, you're always ready. I think that was your quote. I think I love that. I'm gonna get myself run down to tattoo parlor immediately and get that put somewhere.
So I don't see any questions in the QA. I am actually surprised and floored. So that means we've been answering some of our questions through the panel. I'm just going to take that. I'm going to take that.
I believe it's the energy and the insights from the panel. So obviously, Ontinue joining us and being able to have that very candid dialogue. I mean, to your point, we've said some very industry like very industry specific hot takes that are employer agnostic, let's say.
And also, like I said before, our party favor here is the slide deck. This slide deck is rich with content. We kind of muddled through some slides because this is rapid fire panel, love it. And also we have some really cool AHQs. So like to get back to the premise of supply chain. So definitely please use it at your, discretion. And that's all I have to say.
I'll just to jump in, the last thing, my point would be, if you're a CISO watching this, then this is definitely the kind of thing you need to be bringing out to your info, your chief CIO, because this is endemic in the whole of these businesses. They don't have that good management of their suppliers in the same way they do for physical artifacts of stuff. In the software side, they just don't have the same controls, but those controls can be really damaging to their end business.
You said it, and I also want to flash the survey here. So it should take less than 3 minutes. If you're interested in getting the recording and the deck as soon as possible, go ahead and submit that. Make sure you have access to all of the content presented here, and also want to give a shout out to Ontinue, who've joined us, and so I want to share their information as well, and we'll follow up, making sure you have the contact information appropriately. So thank you everybody for joining us. It has been an incredible experience. I've learned a lot. I know we're all better for it, and sharing our perspectives, and cybersecurity truly is a team sport. So figure it out and tune it away is my guidance for the day. Thank you, everyone.
What do you say? Stay ready so we don't have to what? Get ready?
That's right. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Bye, everyone.